Okay, so here we have Daniel Roberts. And Daniel, go ahead, give us a brief breakdown of the rundown of the pieces you did, and then you can start your check-in.
Right. So the pieces that I did was mainly from Mr. Katz and recording. So they recorded most from the 2020 and 2019. So that's where I pulled most of my stuff from. So that starts with, let's see my list here. Right. So that started with Dear Promoter by NLCB for Fonclair, arranged by Darren Shepard. 2020, of course. More Soca, Nyla Blackman by Trinidad All Stars, arranged by Mr. Leon Smooth Edwards in 2020. Trouble in the Morning by Vaughan, performed by Hatter's Steel Orchestra, arranged by Earl Brooks Sr. and Earl Brooks Jr., 2020. Wrong Again by Skinny Banton, performed by Caribbean Airlines Skiffle, arranged by Mark Brook, followed by Feeling It, done by Baron, originally done by Baron, performed by Shell Invaders, arranged by Arden Herbert. Soca Global by Earth and Als, performed by NGC Steel Explosion, arranged by Odie Franklin. My Home by Farmer Nappy, performed by Curep Shirzano. This is in a medium section, arranged by Johan Popwell. That was 2020. Hookin' Me by Farmer Nappy as well, this time performed by BP Renegades, arranged by Tuvon Stewart. 2019. Savannah Grass by Kes the Band, performed by Exodus, arranged by Pelham Goddard in 2019. And then Year for Love by Aaron Voice St. Louis, performed by Desperados, arranged by Alton Xander Alexander. Right, so the first thing that stood out to me is that after our first class, kind of where we went through the structure of a panorama piece for Dr. Henry, when he put his analysis chart template, we only had introduction, exposition, development, recalculation, then conclusion. And so I wondered why we didn't break down development further. And that's when, after going through these pieces, you can't. That development section, everybody has their own spin. And well, since I was able to do a number of different arrangers, you got to see how each one approached the development. So a few things that I noticed is a few trends, that most of the time, the exposition is the verse and chorus. Sometimes, so for example, with which one was it? With More Soca by All Stars. So what Mr. Smooth did is he did the first verse as the exposition. He did the first verse, the chorus. The second verse had slight variations. With like we say, it's stuck to the melody of the verse, but he would throw in like some extra lines, but nothing too much, and then go to the chorus. I decided to call that the exposition, not the development, because of how we came back to that chorus, because the chorus was very simple, was almost as simple as the first as the first chorus. There were a lot of trends that I noticed, which is that for your introduction, and I also, just so that everybody knows, I also have the privilege of actually learning to do my own panorama arrangement this semester with Mr. Sion Gomez. So, I mean, I kind of have like a little insight from him as well. And he was telling me one of the last things that panorama bands do, not always, but sometimes one of the last things they do is the introduction, because they base the introduction on certain phrases that would be done throughout the development or in the exposition. What I've come to notice from listening to the different pieces is that what they like to do, or so far what I've heard, what they like to do is that they like to take one phrase from the, let's say, the chorus. So for example, let me see if I could pull up. Right. With More Soca from All Stars again, there's a line, AU, what you want, we want more soca. That introduction is based around that rhythm. AU, what you want, oka. And they use that as a type of ostinato where they currently referencing that, and then they build up. Most of the cases at the end of the introduction, you do a build up into the exposition, which is the first verse and chorus. Another thing I have noticed is just I wonder if I could play it on the piano. Well, of course, I know Mariah just spoke about chromaticisms. So of course, Panorama, one of the unique things about Panorama is they love to use chromaticisms either to bridge certain sections or just sometimes if they want a few variations in the verse, they would use that. One of them that I've noticed is so I don't know if you're able to hear that, but it would go so C, 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 B, B flat, and then so they go down and then they go up to C sharp. So da 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 da, and that's one of the topics that they use all the time as kind of like a bridge, especially to build up into another section. A lot of them like to do change keys when we reach to the development. Sometimes some like to keep it simple, so just one half step. A lot of them, some of them, not a lot of them, sorry, some of them also do more than one, or they might go into the half step, do a little passage there, and then go up one more time. That all helps with the building. Another trend that I've seen is, and Doctor, if you could help me, what? Oh, sorry. Yes, modulation instead of change key.
No,
Yeah,
no,
of
you go
course.
ahead. You go ahead. But what were you
Right.
gonna ask?
Yeah. A lot of. I wonder if you could help me get the proper term for this. Where is it a swazando, where they hit hard and then they go soft and then come back up.
Right. That's one of those tropes of pan. So if you look at the index, that's actually in the index already, right? And I just called it a hit with subito piano and crescendo. I don't have
Right.
a name for it. It's something that's specific to the pan. The way it's done on the pan is specific to the instrument. No other instrument does it that way.
Right. And of course, since it's specific to the panorama arrangements love to use it. They love to use that for an even more excessive crescendo. And you even see the players go down and then come back up. They physically do it just to help, just visually and musically. Where was I? Right. So with the development section, as we were saying before, each arranger tends to give their own take on it. What I have noticed is that most of the developments they end up doing, they keep the same chord progression as the exposition. At least the first part, they keep the same chord progression as the exposition, verse and chorus, but they tend to do a soli with the tenor, I would say the higher voices, with the tenors and the double seconds doing it an octave lower. A soli just meaning it's a phrase that the whole entire section is playing that would be a solo if one person was playing it. A lot of them like to do, of course, a minor section. So for the minor section, what I've realized is some, from what I've known from before, some of them like to use the same chord progression per se, but use in the minor. But what I've noticed from the pieces that I was doing is a lot of them tend to vamp on E minor. And they have two ways of doing this. They could either go to the relative minor, so if we're in C, they'll go to A minor, or if we're in C, some of them like to do the parallel minor, to go from C major to C minor. And I've noticed that a lot of them just stay on that C. If we're talking C, they like to stay on that C minor chord. And they would create like a rhythmic passage where the lower voices play that rhythmic pattern, staying within that C minor or any minor, but usually the one minor. While again, there's another soli taken care by the higher voices. And then the recapitulation, they bring back in either the verse or the chorus. Now, I saw some people saying before it was the chorus, but for me, what I've been seeing, it varies. Sometimes they like to go to the verse, but heavily varied. In fact, more varied than they did it the first time. And so, yes, that is my general finding so far.
I wanted to comment on the vamp because we have vamp in the index, and what you described just now is a vamp with soli. Now, keep in mind that soli is the plural form of solo.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were talking about a solo, call it a solo. But if it's more than one, you can say soli, right? Or you can say solos.
Right.
Right. Because that word has been anglicized, long enough now that people look at it as an English word. So they pluralize it like an English word.
Right.
So I'm fine with either. I made the comment about modulation because Mariah also talked about change keys, and Jirel also talked about change keys as a particular thing. And I get the sense that this is, I don't know if this is something in the community, or if it's just something that the people in the room have been using their brains to, well, it's a change of key. So we call it a change key, right? So for now, though, I wanna call it what it is, which is modulation. But that's a data point that we could probably investigate as to whether or not that usage is something that's widespread. Mariah, go ahead.
Just talking on the topic of change key. The reason why I would use change key instead of modulation, because sometimes I know modulation would be like a specific line that goes right into it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, some of them had a modulation where it would go like from the major to a relative minor, and you wouldn't really hear the change key unless, well, you're a musician and you know about these things. And then there are some change keys that are abrupt, that they would have hammer strokes and then an immediate change
New
key
key.
after.
Right.
So that's why, yeah.
That's so when we learn about modulation in music theory, we learn that the modulation is a change of key. Now, one of the things you may have learned about is the pivot tone, the pivot chord modulation, or the circular fifths modulation. Those are just different kinds of modulation, but there's all kinds of modulation, right? And I think one, Jirel, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say something.
Say it.
I just think we just have a habit of saying change key, because that was like when you're starting to learn music theory, especially from an early stage. Yes, the professor should use modulation because that's rightful term, but just habit of hearing change key. And then in the panyard, it's a mixture of musicians and non-musicians. So they will use if they do say it, they will use the simpler form. So I just think that habit.
It's a terminology thing. So musicians will tend to use modulation, but non-musicians who play the pan might just say change key. And I stuttered just now when I said non-musicians who play the pan, because I felt I was immediately judging myself as to whether or not that was a fair comment to make. But I think that there's probably a percentage of people in a panyard who play the pan, but they do it as a social thing and not as a musical thing. I don't know this to be true, but if my experience with choirs and orchestras is consistent all over the place, then it's probably true in the panyard too. Anybody with like real world experience that could comment on this? Go ahead.
Well, when I started music, the very first thing I started to learn was pan. And I think, from what I remember, it was the same for a lot of the other students as well. And having some friends who are not necessarily in music school, but they know because they started off playing pan, they know how to play pan. For them, it's more of, I won't say leisure, because to keep it real, a lot of people are in it because they gain some sort of money from it. So, from that aspect, they know how to play pan and they know certain musical terms, but they're not as serious as if it was like a musician who is studying music.
Right, I got you. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here, and I want to thank Daniel